go for it, Randy. This documentary is going to show absolute proof that the Bible is real and that many of the most significant stories found in the Bible are actually true. What you're looking at is the man who actually went inside the cavern where these objects were found, but he had to chisel his way into a small hole, and what he found in this cave system would absolutely blow your mind. All these objects that were found in this room were all made of gold. Some of them solid gold objects that are literally hundreds of pounds. And if you were to put a price tag on all of this stuff that was found inside this cave, I'm sure that you're talking about somewhere in the hundreds of billions of dollars in 2025. So this is without question the most important video for many people who are on the fence about is the Bible real or not. Well, this man was guided by God to the very location where these priceless objects were found. And not only that, there were 4 angels from God that were inside the cavern. When he walked into there, he was absolutely shocked. And he literally was frozen because they literally did something to him supernaturally so he couldn't move. But these 4 angels are from God, and they are here to protect these very precious objects. No one knew where the Ark of the Covenant was. No one knew where Noah's Ark was located. It was hidden from the public. No one knew where Mount Sinai was, where God came down on top of the mountain and gave the 10 Commandments to the people. No one knew where God parted the sea, where the Red Sea crossing took place and the Israelites escaped from the Egyptians. No one knew where Sodom and Gomorrah was, where God rained fire and brimstone down on Sodom. But God chose one man and supernaturally guided this man to all of these locations and many more that are talked about in the Bible.
For thousands of years, mankind has been searching for some of the greatest ancient artifacts of all time. And only one man was divinely guided to find some of the greatest discoveries of all time, Ron Wyatt. He found Sodom and Gomorrah out in the middle of the desert, and you clearly see it's a very real place. It's a very real city that was literally rained down upon with fire and brimstone and burned to the ground. He found the Rock of Horeb, which stands over 5 stories tall, and water came out of the center. He found the Ark of the Covenant, a 900-pound throne, literally made of gold. He found the exact location where Jesus was crucified. He found the location where Moses parted the sea. He found the location where Mount Sinai is, where the 10 Commandments were written on in stone. He also found Noah's Ark in Turkey on Mount Ararat, and he found a very mysterious cave underground in Jerusalem that 4 angels are guarding to this very day. What you're going to see now is the remains of an ancient city, Sodom and Gomorrah. A place that's written about in the Bible because the people there were so evil, they were so violent, they were committing sins that were absolutely atrocious in God's eyes, to the point where enough is enough, and he literally rained down fire and brimstone upon these cities. Now this is Ron Wyatt here, and behind him there is a building that was burning at about 4,000 or 5,000 degrees, so hot that it literally vitrified the buildings into like a molten lava-like substance. And you can clearly see that this city is very different from the background. You see a white ash-like substance that is all through the city from where it burned to the ground, and the ashes are heavier than the actual buildings were before they were burned. So that's why the ash is still there almost 4,000 years later. Now when the team went to check out things there, they literally found pieces of the city and they put them in their hands and could crumble them right in their hands like talcum powder. So the whole city has turned to ash. And this is what happens when you don't follow God's laws. When you go lawless and do whatever you want to do. This clearly looks like a war zone. You can see the rooftops, you can see the horizontal lines there, you can see all of the tons of ash that have accumulated on top of the rooftops, on the sides of the buildings there, but you can see the vertical columns. You clearly see what looks like a war zone, and that's exactly what it was. It was a war between God and all the evil people that were living in these cities doing evil things. Now, this is the entrance to the city here, and you clearly see all of these stone buildings that are still standing today on top of all of the hills that surround the city. And you can clearly see the piles. Look at the ash. Look at that. The ash goes up maybe 5 stories up the side of those buildings to the top there. In fact, it's amazing these buildings are still standing up almost 4,000 years later. I can't even imagine what these people must have been thinking, because this happened at nighttime. So they're in complete darkness, and all of a sudden fire starts raining down upon them. Now you can see the windows clearly there in the structures, and that's a ziggurat right there. And they actually have a ziggurat, which is a pyramid structure with windows and doorways and all kinds of things going on there. But clearly you can see the mounds of ashes in the whole city. You can see columns and towers and all kinds of different archways, 90-degree angles obviously, and you can see like above there, you can see like the crown molding where the roof is, around the roof of the edge, and you can see the 90-degree angles there clearly. So this shows you that this city has been thoroughly hidden from the public for many, many centuries, for thousands of years. People didn't know until they started walking into the city and seeing stone buildings like this that are completely vitrified to such a level that this had to be burning at 4,000 or 5,000 degrees temperature to be able to melt stone to such a length like this. So this is mind-blowing to see something like this. Sodom and Gomorrah is very real, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who thought this was just something in a Bible story, it's not a story, it's a real location. And you can go there and you can clearly see the vitrification in all of these stone buildings. And the walls, everything has been completely burned to the ground. Now, they're still standing. I don't know how that works, but you clearly can see, like buildings like this, you'll see the angles there. It looks like a staircase or something, but you can see what clearly are 2 walls there that are coming down at angles that, you know, clearly show you that intelligence was put behind the thought when they made this city, and it was made out of stone. It's very difficult to build with stone. So when you see that all of this has been built with stone, and it's all been thoroughly burned through like some kind of a war zone, like out of, you know, the worst nightmare you can imagine, you clearly can see that you have structures that are still there today. And again, Ron Wyatt discovered this, and there's more to this story, a lot more to it that I will tell you about here in a moment. But just know that this is probably going to happen again, because God doesn't like what's taking place down in his kingdom down here. Now here we can see the remains of what looks like a sphinx, and it is clearly burned thoroughly through from the sulfur. You have white ash there that remains there, but it's amazing it's still standing. Over there to the left is what looks like a tower, and if you take a closer look at it, it's a circular tower that's right there where the entrance to the city. This looks like a castle that is literally surrounded by a moat all the way around this entire castle. And the moat obviously is dried up, there's no water. This is an archway entering into a building, and you clearly see the archway there. You see the 90-degree angles and the erosion and the burning of the outside of the stones. But inside there, they wanted to go inside, but they were afraid they might get trapped. So because there was so much violence in Sodom and Gomorrah, God had to make an example to show future generations what would happen if you continued to sin. Things like murder, stealing, adultery, sorcery, sexual wickedness, idolatry, even rape were common things that were happening on a daily basis in these cities. So God had to make an example and rain fire and brimstone down upon them. So God sent 2 of his angels down to Sodom to see if he could find 10 righteous people, and if he could, he wouldn't burn the city to the ground. But guess what? He couldn't even find 10 people. He found Lot and his family, who were the only righteous family in the whole entire city. So what ended up happening is the 2 angels stayed with Lot's family overnight, and men gathered around the house and surrounded the house because they wanted to have sexual wicked things with these 2 angels. So Lot said, "Take my 2 daughters." And the men said, "No, we want the men." They had to have God intercede, and God blinded the first few people that were right next to the door. So the angels told Lot's family to run for their life to the mountains and get out of here, because it was about to be burned to the ground by God. So that's what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. There was corruption, there was murder, and every kind of immoral act that you can think of was taking place in that city. So God had to make an example of Sodom and Gomorrah so that future generations, thousands of years later, wouldn't make the same mistakes. So he rained fire and brimstone down upon the cities.
Before I started using this knife, it was very, very sharp. Okay, here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur. What we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze.
Now Ron's wife took one of those brimstone balls and put it into a spoon and lit it on fire, and guess what happened? It turned into a purple flame, which is a very intense flame, much more intense than a blue flame, and it burned a hole into the spoon, which tells you what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. These houses were vitrified because the metal and the stone burned. Next, Ron took a sample of the brimstone to Gullbrick Laboratories, where they discovered something very unique. These brimstone balls were actually made out of sulfur, and not just any sulfur, one of the purest forms of sulfur on Earth, 95.72% sulfur, which is extremely high. For sulfur, you can't find it in its natural form that way. But it was so intense, the other elements inside there were so intense of a flame that they literally couldn't even test it for a BTU because it would burn up one of their machines, so they couldn't even do a BTU test.
Now, once you become aware, no end of these large blobs of sulfur, that particular one there, is in the neighborhood of probably 10 to 15 pounds.
This is the Rock of Horeb, one of the most amazing places where a miracle took place from God. Moses was bringing 3 million Israelites out of Egypt, and we were in the middle of Saudi Arabia with no water. And they're standing there, and all these people are coming to Moses. We need water. We're dying of thirst. So Moses asked God, and God said, Moses, go up to the top of this mountain and see where that big rock is. I will be on top of that rock. And I want you to bring your rod with you, and I want you to tap that rock with your rod, and water's going to come forth so the people can drink. And sure enough, Moses went on top of the mount, stood next to this big gigantic rock, split that sucker right down the center with his rod, and water started pouring out of this gigantic rock in the middle of the desert. Okay, in Saudi Arabia, that doesn't happen. That's not normal. And as you can see, there's water erosion all around this area because millions of gallons of water came out of this very site, out of a rock. Only God can make miracles like that happen. The Israelites were there, and they just brought their pots and whatever they can to get the water, and literally took all the water they needed, because this water came flowing out of the center of that rock up there, and it came down to the bottom of this hill. And all of these rocks in this area all show signs of erosion from extreme amounts of water coming out of this rock. And imagine, again, there's no water in the area, and the water is coming out of the top of this hill. It makes absolutely no sense until you bring God into this. God can do absolutely anything. And again, Ron White is the one that discovered this rock formation. Nobody knew where the Rock of Horeb was until Ron discovered it. So Ron has discovered so many things. You have to stop and check and figure out what's really going on here. Ron was supernaturally guided by God to find all of these things. No person could have gone out in the desert and found this. It's out in the middle of the desert in a place where you would never go to. But Ron found this along with all the other things that he found. So this is absolute proof that the Bible is true, number one, and that Ron was divinely guided by God to find these things, to bring them out at this time when people need to know this information. 600 years before Jesus Christ died on the cross, God had Jeremiah take the Ark of the Covenant and take it out of the first temple before it was destroyed by the invading armies. And he had him put it into a secret chamber in Jerusalem, 20 feet underground, in a location exactly underneath the cross where Jesus was crucified.
We've been working in this area since 1979, and shall we say it hasn't been an easy job. In 1982, we were able to get into the chamber where we saw some of the furnishings from the first temple. Now, we accomplished that by going down through this hole here.
This is what the Ark of the Covenant looks like in real life. It's literally the throne of God. It weighs over 900 pounds, and it's made out of solid gold. Over to the right is what's known as the mercy seat. Over to the left is what's known as the testimony, where the 2 stone tablets that are written on that have the 10 commandments from God. Over to the right is what's known as God's testimony. That's because that red spot over to the left side of the mercy seat there is a blood stain from Jesus Christ when he died on the cross. The Ark of the Covenant is God's earthly throne here on earth. Now, when Ron Wyatt found the Ark of the Covenant, he didn't find it sitting inside this chamber all out in the open. It was actually inside a stone box that was about 5 feet wide, and as he peered down into the box, he clearly noticed this golden object that he recognized as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, as you come into the chamber, what you'll notice first is there's 2 levels. On the first level, there was gold objects that were covered up by skins, and then on the second level is where he actually found this stone sarcophagus that inside housed the Ark of the Covenant, the greatest archaeological find of all time. You saw the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, this is what they were looking for in that movie, was the Ark of the Covenant, the most precious object on earth today. Now, as Ron entered the chamber on the first level, he noticed the candlestick holder over in the corner there, covered up by some skins, and he also noticed some other furnishings from the first temple. All of these would have been destroyed by the invading armies unless Jeremiah had taken them out of the first temple and placed them in this secret chamber. Now, it's no accident that God had Jeremiah place all of these artifacts and the Ark of the Covenant exactly where they were placed inside the secret chamber over 600 years before Jesus was crucified on the cross. And the chamber, where this crack is in the top of the lid there, the stone sarcophagus, it was located exactly under the cross, about 20 feet underground, directly where Jesus was crucified on the cross. No accident. There's a reason, because when the blood dripped down the cross and into that crack, it literally went right down the crack, and the blood from Jesus Christ landed on the actual mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. This was no accident. This was planned out by God over 600 years before Jesus died on the cross.
Now, you see where Ron Wyatt is leaning against that rock? That's where Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross. In fact, his cross was put in a cross hole that's right where that arrow is pointing down to. That's where the cross was put into the ground. And do you see the crack in the rock? When Jesus died, God made an earthquake happen, and the rocks went back and forth and made a crack that went down 20 feet down into the chamber, where directly underneath this crack, God had Jeremiah place the Ark of the Covenant, God's earthly throne, 20 feet below where the cross hole was, so that Jesus' blood would go down the cross into the crack in the cross hole and down 20 feet of rock and land perfectly on the Ark of the Covenant, God's throne. So let's hear from Ron Wyatt himself to find out about this magnificent discovery.
On January 6th, 1982, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I broke into a chamber beneath the Calvary escarpment, north of the city wall of Jerusalem. In that chamber is the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, and several other things that I didn't see. They were covered with animal skins, with boards, and then with stones. We had excavated down that escarpment. We had found 3 cutouts in the wall like a recessed bookcase. We know from the valley north of Jerusalem that the ancient kings and rulers cut these things out in cliffs near populous areas or where a lot of people would be going by, and they put plaques of stone and whatever else in there bearing messages. We found the cutouts. We found the cross hole. If you read in the book of Matthew and the Gospels where it talks about Christ's death, it says the earth shook violently and the rocks were rent. Right to the left of the cross hole, at the base of where Christ died on the cross, the rock was rent. After Christ died, and the centurion stuck his spear into Christ's spleen, and the blood and water came out, it went down through that crack. It went on to the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant that God had arranged to be hidden in that chamber 600 years before Christ died. Now, what is the significance of this? Psalm 77:13 says, "Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary." On the Day of Atonement, the goat that represented Christ as the sin bearer, after all of the sins were figuratively transferred to its head, was killed. Its blood was taken into the most holy place and sprinkled on the mercy seat. Those folks looked forward to the fact that Christ would die. They confessed their sins on the head of lambs and took the lives of these innocent little animals.
The reason I dug in that particular place was an unusual thing that happened to me. I was walking by there. My sons and I had gone to Israel to get chariot parts out of the Red Sea. Due to my own ignorance and carelessness, I got sunburned so bad my feet and legs swelled up. I couldn't get my diving gear. So we were up hobbling around Jerusalem, waiting for the date that was on our ticket. We got one of those cheap tickets that you can only fly on the proper date. I was walking along and my left hand just went out like that and my mouth said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant's in there." Well, I didn't do that. Deliberately, it happened without my mental intent to do so. And I knew that some supernatural power had used my arm and my voice. I wasn't sure which. So I went back home and started checking to see why the Ark of the Covenant might be there. And the research indicated that it quite likely would be there. The Ark of the Covenant most likely was carried out of the temple and hidden in this chamber during the 28 days between the time Zedekiah fled the city and the occasion when the Babylonian army came and destroyed the city, the temple, and the palaces, and all that. At that point in time, many people were probably being buried. I wasn't there, I don't know, but it seemed like that would be an opportunity to do that. Now, if the priests just took the Ark of the Covenant and started carrying it out and into a cave, the Babylonian army would get a glimpse of it. The Jewish people in the city would have got a glimpse, and there would have been a real hubbub, you know what I mean? So it appears they put in this thin wall stone box to make it appear that it was just another burial. Now, when I found the Ark of the Covenant, the lid on the stone box had been busted and slid around, one end of it slid around to the side, and there was dried blood on both edges of that broken lid. And of course later, when I had access to the mercy seat itself, there was large quantities of dried blood and serum on it. It's not ordinary blood, folks. It has 24 chromosomes only. All of us here have 46. Unless, there's a couple of genetic anomalies that make that different. But Christ received 23 from his mother and one sex determining factor from his father, who was not a human father. Because had he received that from a human father, it would have been accompanied by 22 autosomes. Now what this basically means is that his height, his eye color, his hair color, and all of this was supplied from the genes of his mother's gene pool. However, Mary and Joseph both descended from David. But none of us have 24 chromosomes. And there's something else. The Bible says, "You will not leave my soul in hell, nor allow my body to see corruption." The blood of Christ is only dried out, folks. It's not dead. When we rehydrated it with normal saline, 72 hours of body temperature with slight, very gentle swirling, and put the white blood cells in a growth medium, 48 hours later, we did a chromosome count. I didn't. I have people who are experts at that sort of thing to do these things for me.
When Christ was crucified, the Romans had picked a place north of the city wall where most everybody that came and went. They passed on their way to Jaffa, they passed here on their way to Damascus, on their way to Jericho, on their way to Anatoth, and all of these other places. They had to go along this road on the north side of the city, because to the south, the east, and the west were big gullies. And you had to be pretty, agile on your feet to go through those areas to get away from the city. So they chose this place for the crucifixion. And they cut out 3 recessed areas into the rock face that would hold signs stating who the person was that was being crucified and what his accusation was, what he had been accused of. Well, in Christ's case, he was Jesus of Nazareth.
North of the city wall of Jerusalem lies a beautiful garden right next to the crucifixion site. In that garden, less than 200 feet from the place that Jesus was crucified, is a tomb chiseled into the face of the cliff.
Now we're going to go in. Here we can see inside of the tomb. Very old cross. And here we can see, right back here, it was dug out more, presumably because Christ was taller, to accommodate him. Was out this door that Christ walked. He walked on this floor.
The chamber where I found the Ark of the Covenant has since been perfectly cleaned out. And the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the candlestick, the golden altar of incense, they are all set out as they were in the earthly temple, except that the Ark of the Covenant is setting against the 12-foot long and 18-foot wide or high wall. The tables of stone were found in the Ark of the Covenant. I personally removed them with the assistance of 4 angels who lifted the mercy seat, which I would estimate weighs about 900 pounds. of solid gold. And one of these angels told me to take the tables of stone out of there. He said God wants everyone to see those. And so I took them out, backed up, stood there, frozen in place, and I just can't describe my physical state or mental state or anything else. If I didn't have some physical evidence to prove it happened, I think I had a dream or something. But anyway, they are now available to be shown. But we won't say, actually they're on a stone ledge right in the same chamber. That's where the angel put them after I handed them to him. I didn't know what to do with them. And I was told that these are to be presented with the blood evidence when the mark of the beast law is passed or enforced. Now, I know everybody wonders about what it is, the mark of the beast. You've heard all kinds of rumors, stories, and all of this. I'll tell you quick and simple. If you keep the 10 Commandments that God wrote upon those tables of stone, and about which he says in Psalms 89:34, those of you that are writing down text, you'll want this one. Psalms 89:34. He says, my covenant will I not break, nor alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. He spoke the 10 Commandments from the mountaintop. He wrote them in stone, and he says, nothing will change. Right? If you keep that law, you will receive the seal of God. Soon there will be a set of man-made laws, best intentions, surrounded by a barrage of salubrious soliloquies and sepulchral solicitudes. That's all kinds of stories and all of this instigated by the devil to make you think that this is the best thing that ever happened to the human race and that you could just ought to go along with it voluntarily. These man-made laws will require that you break God's 10 Commandments. Christ said to the Pharisees, for it is in vain that they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. If you keep those man-made laws and break God's 10 Commandments, you will receive the mark of the beast. You will receive the mark of the beast. When I started praying that God would change me and do whatever was necessary in my life so that he could work in and through me to help others come to him and be saved, things started to change. That's what I recommend that you do, folks. That you ask the Father in the name and blood of his Son to come into your life through the power of his Holy Spirit, forgive you, cleanse you, help you quit sinning, and help you to reflect his character to the point that people will be drawn to him by your influence.
One of the samples was actually the blood sample that Ron had taken from the Ark of the Covenant dig. Okay, Marinelle's going to take the sample. The sample was placed under the microscope, and as the specimen began to come into focus, thousands of tiny particles, somatids if you will, became plainly visible. At that time, Marinelle, who was standing behind me, began to weep. As I turned around and saw the expression on her face, I realized immediately that the sample we were looking at was actually the sample that Ron had found to be the blood of Christ.
Dried blood is dead blood. Everybody knows that, all right? They can test the blood of the pharaohs, the mummies of the pharaohs, all right? There's certain things they can do. They cannot get a chromosome count. by any method I'm familiar with. All right, things keep changing. I don't profess to know everything. However, there's no way I know that you can get a chromosome count out of dead blood. You can get a DNA and some other things, but not a chromosome count. All right, that's done by living white blood cells. Now then, first of all, in this analysis, I took the blood into a laboratory in Israel. I asked one of the people I work with in antiquities, where is a good laboratory that does reliable work? And they said, such and such, such and such. I took it. I just said, please examine this blood and tell me what you can tell me about it. All right? They said, well, look, we're going to reconstitute it. We're going to put it in normal saline and keep it at body temperature for 72 hours with gentle swirling. All right, that's their business. That's great. I said, now I want to be there when you check it out. They said, fine. So I was back. They checked it out. I said, now, they said it's human blood. We can tell that. They did whatever tests they need to do. And then I said, take some of the white blood cells and put them in a growth medium and keep them at body temperature for 48 hours. And they said, well, that'll do no good because it's dead blood. I said, would you please do that for me? And they said, okay, we'll do it. So anyway, I said, I want to be there when you take it out and examine it. So I was back there. They took it out, examined it under microscope, and the one technician called the other one over there, and then they called the boss over there, and they were talking Hebrew a mile a minute there for a little bit, and they looked at me and they said, Mr. Wyatt, this human blood only has 24 chromosomes in it. Everybody else has 46. You see, 23 from your mother, 23 from your father, 22 autosomes from your mother, 22 autosomes from your father. You get an X from your mother, you may get an X or a Y from your father, all right? This blood had 23 chromosomes from the mother's side, one Y chromosome only. You see, the child could not have developed if they hadn't had the autosomes from the mother. So all of his physical characteristics were determined by his mother's side of the family, her autosomes. His maleness was determined by this one Y that came from the source, not a human male. Not a human male. Then they said, this blood is alive. And then they said, whose blood is this? I said, it's the blood of your Messiah. And I assure you, those men's lives have changed.
This is Henry Groover, who is a world-famous pastor. He's done many amazing things. Bottom line is, Henry Groover knew Ron Wyatt and had him speak at one of the events that they were speaking at, but they had to verify that this claim that Ron Wyatt had about Jesus Christ's blood being supernatural had to be verified by actual lab reports. There was 3 different lab reports. So Henry Groover is giving testimony on camera that the lab reports were verified by experts and found to be authentic.
My name is Henry Groover. I'm with Joyful Sound Ministries in Woodbine, Iowa. And I worked for many years with Ron Wyatt, traveled many places with him, met him in Jerusalem, been back to Jerusalem and parts of the Middle East with him, from Turkey to Egypt. And Ron Wyatt shared with me the certificates of the documentation of the lab reports from Jerusalem, Germany, and America. 3 laboratories where the blood was tested that he scraped off of the sarcophagus and the area where the blood came down through the crack from the center cross hole onto the sarcophagus that held the Ark of the Covenant. I was in the Southwest Regional Convention of the Full Gospel Businessmen in January of 1998. No, 89. I'll get that right. 89. That was in the year that I met him in April. I was with Ron Wyatt in 1989. Anyhow, Demas Shakarian was there. The lawyer for the Full Gospel Businessmen was there at the table, and a document specialist from out of Los Angeles. We were there. Ron brought his certificates from his lab reports, from all of the different lab reports that he had. But I want to focus on just these 3 certificates. This seemed to be the real interest of the document specialist. He inspected the 3 different lab reports from Jerusalem, Germany, and America of the blood that went on the mercy seat. He looked them over. He literally had documentation for the labs, the technicians, and the listing of every test that was done. He had the numbers. He inspected those certificates with different levels of magnification. He looked them over very carefully, checking them with his documentation. He looked at Demas Shakarian, and he said, I would verify the authenticity of these documents to the highest court of this nation. Now, what that was the analysis of the blood of the X and the Y chromosomes, showing very clearly from all 3 labs the same response. This is blood of a male factor. It is blood that proves it has the chromosomes that a mother, but there is no blood for the chromosomes proving an earthly father. And that's the three tests that he inspected along with others. But I was an eyewitness. I sat right beside him, watching him inspect these documents from these different laboratory tests. And so I will verify the truth of this and authenticity of this to the day that I die. I am an eyewitness of this, and I want anyone that would refute this, you better pray about it, because it exists.
Now I'm going to tell you about the supernatural encounter that Ron Wyatt had with 4 angels inside the cave where all of the furnishings were located. One time he came in through another location because he had a secret entrance that Ron would go into, and he literally had a metal locked door on it, and the government there in Jerusalem allowed him to dig there for several years while he was finding all these stuff, and so he had it all locked down, but he tried another entrance through Zechariah's cave, which is underground, and he wanted to see if he could find anything in there. And when he was in there, he was shocked. He saw that the whole cave had been opened up supernaturally by God, by the way. And when he walked into the cave where all of the furnishings were, he was blown away. He got the shock of his life. He turned around the corner and looked, and there stood 4 angels that were standing right at the 4 corners of the Ark of the Covenant. And they literally made him supernaturally freeze in place. So Ron Wyatt was like frozen in place. He could not move. He could not do anything. He couldn't talk. And basically, this is some kind of supernatural power that took place there, because they didn't want him to, freak out. Can you imagine what angels must encounter when they encounter human beings? But these 4 angels, they were all in white, dressed in white robes, and they literally lifted up the Ark of the Covenant so that Ron Wyatt could literally go inside the Ark and pick up the 2 tables of stone, the 10 Commandments. And he literally pulled the 10 Commandments out of the Ark of the Covenant. Ron Wyatt did this, and I'm sure he knows the Bible. I'm sure he didn't touch it with his hands. In other words, the Ark. I guarantee you he was very careful when he pulled out the 2 tables of stone. And then he set them over, the angels wanted him to set them over onto a ledge that was right there inside this cave, this secret cave, which is, again, this is the holiest of holies today.
This is the site where Ron Wyatt found the Red Sea crossing. Now, when Moses was bringing the 3 million Israelites out of Egypt, he took them through this winding canyons out in the desert. Now, keep in mind, you have 3 million people that are slaves from Egypt. These Israelites were slaves over in Egypt, and they're right there on this beach, but they have nowhere to go, and the Egyptian army's right behind them. So Moses asked God, and he literally parted the sea, and they all walked across the Gulf of Aqaba, which is about a 10-mile trek to get across the Gulf of Aqaba to get over to Saudi Arabia. So can you imagine being right there on the beach and seeing 3 million people walk in between two gigantic waves that are on both sides of you? Egyptian army was right there on the beach to the left there, and they literally were after these people, these Israelites. They wanted to capture them because they were their slaves. So God made a fire hold the Egyptian army back so that the Israelites could walk safely across the 10-mile trek that it took to get across the Gulf of Aqaba over to safety in Saudi Arabia. So once the Israelites made it to safety on the other side, all 3 million of them made it across safely. The Egyptian army were let loose by God. The fire was evaporated, and the Egyptian army came hauling across that bottom of that seafloor, and they got about halfway across, and God stopped the waters from being parted, and all of that water came crashing down on their chariots. So these are chariot wheels that Ron Wyatt found on the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba. This was made by King Solomon to mark where Moses had the Red Sea crossing, where he parted the seas.
Where the Red Sea was parted, that's a very real place too. It's in the Gulf of Aqaba. This is what the Gulf of Aqaba looks like today, where God literally parted the sea so that the Israelites could get across to the other side, 8 miles across the Gulf of Aqaba to safety in Saudi Arabia. Now here is Ron Wyatt with his 2 sons here, and they're going scuba diving into the Gulf of Aqaba after he tried to find out, is this the area? And he went to find evidence. He found, the very first time, he found a wheel on the bottom from one of the spoke wheels that are on the chariots of the Egyptian army. Well, guess what? They're still on the bottom. You can see there an axle and the 2 wheels there. You can see that coral has surrounded the whole wheel there and the axles there, and it has attached itself to them, but they're still preserved. But this is a 4-spoke gold wheel right there. You see that wheel there? The outside of it is gold. Well, guess what? Coral does not attach to gold, but the inner hub there has wood around it. The coral attached to the hub around where the hub is there. But that is absolute evidence that the Egyptian army crossed right in this location where Ron Wyatt was guided to go and look and see if this could be the place where the Red Sea crossing took place. So this is absolute proof that this is the location. They have the artifacts. They have all of this stuff right there on the bottom of the seafloor. Now here's where the Israelites traveled through the canyons. The Wadi Watir is what they call these canyons. And you can see there's the Gulf of Aqaba where those red dots are. That's where they should have gone, was around the Gulf of Aqaba. But they turned south right there where that outcropping is right here. That is where they ended up, on the beach with literally nowhere to go but across the ocean. Well, how are you going to get 1 million people to cross an ocean that's literally as much as 1,000 feet or more deep in certain locations? But guess what? God had made it so there was a land bridge that went across this location to the other side over to Saudi Arabia. So you see where all of this sand was collecting right there on the beach? Well, that sand went into the Gulf of Aqaba there, and it literally accumulated over thousands of years all the way across to the other side over to Saudi Arabia. So it actually formed a rock bridge, a formation that was about 160 feet below sea level. So it's still way down underneath the water, but when God literally parted the sea, it opened up a wall of water that was at least 160 feet tall so that the Israelites could walk across the seafloor. And then once they got to the safety of the other side, then the Egyptian army went across as well. God let the pillar of fire loose and disappeared it so the Egyptians could follow after them. But when they got about halfway across, God made all of that water come crashing down on the Egyptian army, and so that the Egyptian army was wiped out.
Now this is Mount Sinai, where Moses took the Israelites after they went across the Gulf of Aqaba. When Moses parted the sea, they went to Saudi Arabia, where Mount Sinai is located, and this is where God descended upon earth on top of this mountain and literally wrote the 10 Commandments in stone on 2 stone tablets. Now you'll notice that the top of the mountain looks kind of darkish. Well, that's because God descended into fire on top of the mountain. So it literally scorched the top of the mountain. And when he did that, the earth quaked and the Israelites were shaking in their boots because God was speaking to them, and he literally laid the law down to them. He told them exactly what the 10 Commandments were, and they were to keep his commandments. But as you clearly can see, the top part of the mountain is literally blackish looking, and that's because it was scorched by fire. And God loved his children so much that he had to discipline them because these were sinners. There were 3 million people at the base of Mount Sinai. So basically, he came down as fire to put the fear of God into these people so that they stopped sinning. Now, this stone formation was actually an altar that Ron discovered in Saudi Arabia at the base of Mount Sinai, because all the Israelites were not allowed to go up on Mount Sinai because they'd be too close to God, and literally they could die by just being in God's presence. But because Moses took like 40 days to come down with the 10 Commandments, a lot of the Israelites went back to their old pagan ways, and they started worshiping idols, and they literally got everyone to put gold rings and gold bracelets and necklaces into a pot, and they literally melted down all the gold and made an idol out of a calf. They literally made a calf that they started worshiping on top of this rock formation right here. So when Moses came back down off the mountain, God had told him that they're worshiping idols down there, and God was furious, and he wanted to literally take all the Israelites out. But Moses talked God down from doing that. Now Moses was so upset that he threw the 10 Commandments down on the ground and broke the stone tablets right away and ran up on top of this altar, grabbed this golden calf that was basically a cow. So Moses grinded the actual golden calf into a rock until it became little flakes of gold and threw those flakes of gold into the river. So God hates idolatry when you worship images or idols. Now, after Ron had discovered this site, the Saudi Arabians fenced in this whole area where the altar is because of these 4,000-year-old petroglyphs of golden calves. Okay, they wanted to memorialize it, and basically, if you look closely, you can see these are Egyptian petroglyphs. So someone in that group of 3 million Israelites was doing these calf petroglyphs right there on the stone altar.
On June 20th, 1987, in the mountains of Ararat, Turkey officially recognized the discovery of Noah's Ark. Located on a mountainside about 15 miles south of the volcanic Mount Ararat, the remains of the massive ship were dedicated during a special ceremony. Guest of honor was Ron Wyatt, due to his 10 years of research at the site. The story began in 1957 during the Cold War, when aerial photos taken of eastern Turkey while searching for Soviet missile bases revealed a strange boat-shaped formation in the mountains about 6,300 feet above sea level. Life magazine reported on the story after an expedition from the United States.
Keep walking. Do you want a measuring tape to measure these things, how far apart they are?
Now, they started off using metal detectors to find the nails and the metal brackets that were holding all of the framework together in the ship. Then they went to subsurface interface radars that could penetrate the earth even deeper. And they found all of the timbers. And you clearly can see that there is a very clear pattern here of a ship that's about 500 feet long. And this is clearly Noah's Ark.
There's the key line right there.
Yeah.
All right, the lines are there. The lines are there. Now, this is the west bulkhead. Okay, can you look through there and?
All right.
This is the west bulkhead.
All right.
That was over there, and he walked easterly. Here we start getting the longitudinal bulkheads. Here, 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 here.
Okay.
Here. You see there how it shows up?
Right.
The initial scans were very impressive, showing internal structure consistent with bulkheads and rooms. But to be sure they were interpreting the data correctly, Ron took the scan printouts to Geophysical Survey Systems, the developer and manufacturer of the radar.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interface.
He noted the biblical account of the location of the ark. And the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat.
This type anchor stone is a very familiar object to the students of early navigation. They were used by many of the early civilizations, the Phoenicians in particular, and the shores of the Mediterranean and the floor of the Mediterranean is strewn with these stones. The difference that becomes obvious immediately is the difference in size.
This is deck timber that was taken from near the back of Noah's Ark. Ron found this on the radar scan. This area right here appears to be a silica replacement of the glue that was used to glue these boards or laminate these boards together, and some of it has seeped out the side.
Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that are thinking to themselves, if that's the real Noah's Ark, then how did Noah get all the animals on the actual ark? I mean, how did that happen? Well, in reality, it probably was baby animals. Like if the elephants weren't giant elephants, they were baby elephants, maybe just a few months old. And they got 2 by 2. How did they get them 2 by 2 onto the actual ark? And some of them, they got 7 of them, okay? Unclean animals, they only got 2. So the thing is, how did they do that? Well, Noah didn't do it. God did it, because God can supernaturally guide the animals to the actual ark, and that's exactly the way it happened.